Bom dia a todos, a todas e todes, né, que nos acompanham neste Seminário Internacional de Contas Públicas. Hoje damos início ao quinto e último painel, que vai tratar da experiência internacional na certificação de contas anuais como forma de aumentar a credibilidade.
As a way to increase the credibility of the governments and institutions. And I'd like to start greeting our speakers who honor us here with their presence and experience and knowledge this morning. Mr. Maria Poniski and Ms. Judy Korowski and Mr. James Osborne from the UK Audit Office. We know it by now. Dr. Maria De Luz Carmezin Faria, Counselor Judge of the Federal Court of Accounts of Portugal, and Mr. Jean-Michel Champonier, Magistrate of the French Court of Accounts. Welcome here, and thank you for accepting our invitation and for being with here this morning. And I also greet my colleague moderator, Eduardo Fabio, who is also an auditor of the Federal Court of Accounts and the current director of the Public Accounts Directory. And lastly, I'd like to greet all of the audience that have been present since Monday, people and agencies of the federal and the state and municipal levels, students and other people interested in the modernization of the public accounts modernization. I'm going to review what we have seen in the past few days, which are important for us to see how the systems are interconnected. As Mr. Minister Bruno Dantas, the president of the TCU at the opening of the event, the country is going through an experience in terms of challenges, considering all of the deficits that started in 2014 and the pressure of increasing expenses to meet the demands of a population that is impoverished and is weakened after the pandemic period, and also to recover the pace of growth of our economy that went through many different crises. This situation is aggravated by the instability in terms of legal framework in which the budgetary cycle is developed. That was very broadly debated. The excess of change in regulation that happens in a very short period of time has made it harder to achieve certain results that we want to achieve with the public budget, which is to guarantee tax sustainability, efficient allocation of resources, and public policies and public services and goods that are effectively possible to increase the conditions of society. Considering this situation, it is important to have also resilience, creativity, openness to dialogue, and a lot of effort to be up to the challenge and to the tasks to allocate public resources and so the budgetary process will be very successful. And this court has been trying to help and strengthening its work so we are able to contribute for the improvement of public administration as a benefit for society, and that's our mission. Well, in the second panel, we showed the evolution of the model of controls that has one of the landmarks, the adoption and also the addition of rules, and most recently, the N198 that regulates our new model of accounts. The panel members were unanimous in terms of the benefits that were generated for public accountability. But as it has been debated, there are some evolutions that we still have to go and have to implement. One of the challenges of this new model is to promote integration between the reliability of the accounting processes and the opinion on the acts of compliance of management. In panels 3 and 4, we went through many innovations in terms of technological tools that were available for control that allow us to identify even millions of irregularities that may have undue payments that generate situations in hundreds of billions of dollars, as it is the case of the United States, and big amounts here in Brazil too. Considering the situation, these payments might distort the public accounts in agencies and the federal government, and that's why the evolution of these tools has to be taken into account in the yearly process of checking and the reliability of the accounts and the operations related to it. Well, this is just one of the challenges that we have been working with. The presentations that we're going to have tomorrow, meaning today, this morning, we are going to have precious insights for us to address these challenges and other challenges that still have to be faced in the evolution of a accounting model that will benefit the user and society as well, and will be also useful for decision-making processes and the process of responsibility of public resources. After this first words, I ask our first speakers, Mariuszki Pomienski and Yuri Orowski, to talk about the European Court of Accounts in terms of the operations that are encompassed by financial operations. With over 20 years of experience, Mariusz Pomienski is the director of the 5th Chamber of the European Court of Audits since 2017, and this chamber is responsible for writing a report every year of the European ECA that talks about the reliability of the European accounts and the transactions connected to the financial demonstrations. And Chamber 5 is also responsible for the audit of the performance of many other topics, such as the management, the budgetary management, innovative mechanisms in terms of funding of the EU policies. Before joining the ECA, Mariusz worked in the Polish Court of Audits as an auditor, and he was the vice director of the regional section. Ms. Judith Orowski also worked in the Chamber 5 of the European Court of Audits as a senior manager. She's master's in global relations. She joined this court in 2005, and in 2017 she was assigned to the current post, and she started being responsible for the topic of quality control, quality assurance in terms of the incomes and expenses of the European Union. She's also responsible for audits related to prevention of fraud and protection of the financial interests of the European Union. Before this post, Judith was also worked in a private audit court in Estonia and the Court of Accounts of Hungary. Judith and Mario, vocês têm...
This in our seminar.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear us. Let me try to share my screen with you. I hope it is going to work as intended.
We can see it.
Yes, I'm moving into presentation mode.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it should be right. So warm welcome from Luxembourg. It's 2:45 here, so we are well after lunch. I realize that in Brazil it's much earlier than that. I've been introduced, so just to say, my name is Mariusz Pomienski, Director of Chamber 5 of Court of Auditors in public audit service for more than 20 years now. So I think what I can assure you about at the beginning of this presentation is everything myself and Judith are going to say comes from a real, true, personal experience of ours. So for the last 15 years, I've been to the court, and 10 of which I've worked with the compliance audit of the transactions underlying the financial statement. Maybe I will let Judith say a few words about herself before we kick off. Judith, please.
Yes, thank you, and hello everyone. I was already introduced. I'm Judith Orowski, Principal Manager in Chamber 5. I'm Hungarian in nationality, but I have been also working in the European Court of Auditors since around 15 years, and before in the Hungarian Court of Auditors. And throughout my whole career, I have been dealing with compliance audit, with providing assurance on the regularity of EU spending. So this is going to be the focus of our presentation.
So first, a word of apology. Our Portuguese is pretty bad. So despite the large Portuguese community here in Luxembourg, I think we can hardly go beyond bom dia and obrigado. So we will hold this presentation in English. We would like to share with you our experience, as I said, of our annual compliance audit, the audit of legality, regularity of the transactions underlying the accounts, and we would like to organize this presentation alongside 4 pillars or 4 stepping stones. So first, why do we do this every year? And I think it's interesting also in the context of the overarching title or subject of this seminar: public accountability and the better governance. Then what is it that we actually look at, how, and what do we do with the results, how we come to the conclusions and audit opinion. So I would say, well, it's good to know that we have audit professionals on the other side of the screen. It's a technical subject which for a sort of less informed audience might be complicated, but I hope that as we are all auditors speaking more or less the same language, we'll be able to carry the message across. In any event, if you have questions or if there is something we present in a non-fully comprehensible manner, please let us know. Ask the question at any time. We'll try to avoid our European Union jargon, which is not easy. We understand that for most of you, that our reality is not straightforward and obvious. So we'll try to sort of cross this bridge, this gap as well. So let's start with the first point. That is why. What's the point? Why? What are the reasons for us to do it in the first place? And the most straightforward answer and quite a blunt one is because we have to. There is the primary law of the European Union, the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, puts on us, the European Code of Auditors, actually only one obligation, strictly speaking. So in legal terms, there is only one job we have to do every year, which is provide the European Parliament and the European Council with a statement of assurance as to the reliability of the accounts and the legality and regularity of the underlying transactions. That's the exact wording of the legal basis for our annual work. I mean, there are a few elements that I wanted to underline in this phrase coming from Article 287 of the treaty, is that it is the work of Code of Auditors is in the context of providing the Parliament and the Council. The European Council is the gathering of all governments of the member states of the EU. Today it's 27 governments coming in the Council, and these two bodies, these two institutions, are responsible for passing laws and also for agreeing the budget, and then later granting the discharge of the budget to the European Commission, which functions a little bit as the governments in the national context. So we, the Code of Auditors, inform the discharge debate, discharge decisions of the Parliament and the Council via providing them what is called a statement of assurance in the respect of the accounts and in the respect of legality and regularity of these transactions which underlie the accounts. Now, the term used in the law is a statement of assurance, and obviously SOA for short in the slide. And obviously this has to be translated in the context of the Code of Auditors, of our context, into more operational language. So we have to come to understanding what it really means for us in terms of the work that's expected from us. And this is what we collectively as the Code of Auditors over years have understood the meaning, the content of the term statement of assurance is. Well, first of all, it's we understand that this is an obligation that's on us to provide an audit opinion. And obviously, this immediately raises the bar in terms of what type of evidence, what type of work, what amount of work, what quantity of work is necessary to come to this point. So it's not just an audit with a conclusion. No, we need to be able to formulate an audit opinion or opinions as it will appear in a minute after it. Secondly, it's not just an audit opinion, but with reasonable assurance. Reasonable assurance, as obviously compared to limited assurance, will require yet another step up in raising of the bar. So we must gather in the course of this audit sufficient and appropriate evidence to be able to formulate our audit opinion in positive terms, so that we are sure that this is the state of affairs, that the opinion can be modified or unmodified, but with a reasonable assurance, which is mostly guided, this conviction that it must be reasonable assurance is mostly guided by the needs of the intended users of this opinion. So the European Parliament and the European Council, they need strong information based on extensive audit work to inform their decision-making on granting or not granting the discharge to those who manage the funds of the European budget. And last but not least, we've already said audit opinions with reasonable assurance on transactions underlying the annual accounts. Judith will say a few more words about what we defined and the transactions underlying the annual accounts. It may seem straightforward. It is probably less so, particularly in the context of the budget of the European Union, which is a multi-annual budget, then turned into annual exercises in which there is a specific flow of funds, slightly different from the traditional sort of budget of any state. So we do the audit because it's our legal obligation. We understand the statement of assurance as obligation to provide an audit opinion on the transactions with reasonable assurance, which is the strongest possible or the most demanding on auditor requirement that we can think of. And I will start now by telling you, what is the opinions that we provided over the last report that's been published. It's a little bit unfortunate that this webinar is today, because in 3 weeks from now, the annual report on 21 accounts will be published, and we would be able to talk to you on the examples of the most recent audit. Unfortunately, as this is only happening in 3 weeks, we are not allowed yet to disclose any details of our audit of last year. But it's probably less important in this context. So this is the slide that will reappear as the last slide of this presentation, where I try to we try to walk you through our process. That, yes, as I mentioned in the slide before, we go for an audit opinion with a reasonable assurance, and this is actually more than one opinion because of the subject matter that we look at. We have a separate opinion on the reliability of the accounts, on the financial statements themselves, and then separate opinions on transactions, on legality, regularity of transactions. Given that the budget has both sides, revenue, expenditure, we have separate opinions on both. What's worth mentioning as well in this context, because again, it might be unlike in other jurisdictions or in other in the experience of other national audit offices, we give the opinion on the budget as a whole. So we do not provide separate opinion per department, per ministry, per agency, per fund. Well, agency, maybe it's a slightly different issue, but for us, the opinion, our audit engagement is defined on the level of the whole budget. Again, it's a thing worth remembering to maybe better understand what follows in our presentation. We move on to the second step. So what is it that we audit? What are the transactions underlying the budget? Here I give the floor to Judith.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mariusz. So I will continue with describing what is the EU budget made up of, in particular EU spending. So as you see from this graph, in terms of amount, on average, EU spending on a yearly basis around between 100 and 150 billion euro. In 2020, audited population was 150 billion euro. Now, this 150 billion euro is made up of a wide variety of EU policy areas. So the biggest chunk of this EU spending is spent on the area of natural resources. This is mainly spending on agriculture, and a big amount of it is direct payment to farmers, where basically the main policy objective, one of the policy objectives, is to ensure secure income for farmers and to maintain sustainable farming practices in Europe. Then the other main chunk of yearly EU spending is on the policy area, which is called cohesion. As you see in this graph, this is the dark blue. And this spending mainly is there to ensure economic, social, and territorial cohesion. So it is mainly spending on investment projects in Europe's regions, and also on social projects. For example, by schools, educational projects, or to ensure that unemployed people can come back to work as soon as possible. So this is the second biggest area. And the third biggest area of EU spending is on the area of competitiveness. This is the light blue. And this spending is mainly composed of spending on research projects, big research projects implemented by consortium of universities or research institutes. There are other, let's say, smaller spending areas which are also important. For example, the European Union's spending on external actions, which is here called Global Europe, which is the development funds and also humanitarian aid. Then, which has become nowadays very important, is spending on security and citizenship, where European Union spends also to secure its internal borders. So as you see, a wide variety of EU policy areas, and we have to cover all this spending in our annual statement of assurance on EU expenditure. This is another slide which just illustrates that in this EU spending and the different spending areas, there are a wide variety of different transactions with different recipients. For example, there are millions of payments made to farmers in Europe, and these payments are made not directly by the European Commission, but first European Commission pays to paying agencies in member states, and these paying agencies are then responsible for distributing the money to the farmers. Then there are also, I will not go that much into detail, but for example, in the area of cohesion, which is the other biggest spending area, we have as well 800 operational programs, which are operational programs for Europe's regions, and these are agreed in advance. Basically, they agree, member states have to, and regions have to agree with the European Commission what will be the spending objectives, what kind of projects will be financed. And through these operational programs, there are thousands of projects to be financed. Then there are several thousand research contracts, and I could go on with all the different types of transactions. So overall, we have millions and millions of different types of transactions in our population. Then a last slide about our population. So what exactly do we audit? In the EU budget, which is multi-annual by nature in terms of implementing projects, we have several different types of transactions, mainly advance payments to projects. And then afterwards, when projects are being implemented and there are costs incurred, there is reality behind the payments. We have interim and final payments. And in our statement of assurance audit, what we try to do is we are trying to look at those transactions where there has been an implementation or a progress in a project where there are costs incurred. So when there is an advance payment, we look at these payments at the moment when they will be cleared in the EU's accounts, when there are costs incurred. So this is how, this is our methodology to define what type of transactions enter into our audit population. Now let me come to the next point, which is about how do we check these transactions. Let's say to provide assurance, we base our assurance mostly on substantive testing on transactions. And this is because from our point of view, from the European Court of Auditors, this is the most cost-effective way. There are, as I already mentioned, several thousand type of transactions and several thousands of systems in the European Union implemented at regional level and sub-regional level. And for this reason, we cannot base our assurance on systems testing. This would be, just from my point of view, not cost effective. So we base our assurance mostly on the results of our substantive testing, which mainly involve testing a relatively large number of transactions. For selecting these transactions, we use monetary unit sampling. This means that for us, the sampling unit is €1. So every euro has the same chance of being selected. But this monetary unit sampling also means that bigger payments, bigger transactions will have a higher likelihood to come into our sample. Also because when we sample, we first then separate high value items. So the big transactions will in any case come into our sample. And for this monetary unit sampling, of course, we need a random starting point and then a sampling interval, which means basically that we divide the amount of money, the expenditure in a certain area by the number of sample items, and then we basically run the sampling and select the number of transactions. So this is a bit about how we select the transactions, which we are going to test in detail. A bit of even more technicalities is how we define the sample size. What is the amount of sample which is for us necessary to come to reasonable assurance, and for audits providing reasonable assurance and in a substantive testing environment based on a sample, we define it that we need 95% confidence to be sure that either our results are above the 2% materiality threshold or below. For determining our sample sizes, in line with the auditing standards, we also take into account the inherent risk of the spending area and the type of transactions, and the control risk, whether the systems provide you some assurance or not. Now, we also, when we select the transactions, we try to focus on those areas where we think are high risk. This is mainly to add more value by our audits, because if when focusing on these high risk areas, we will be able to identify the problems and highlight them to our stakeholders and have more valuable recommendations. So this means that our overall population of EU spending, the EU budget areas, we divide into low risk areas where we'll do less testing. This is the left side of the small box. In the green side, where we'll have higher average sampling interval and a smaller sample size. And in the high risk area, we will do more testing. Overall, stratification will not have any impact in the overall results. Our level of error, which is our main indicator for regularity, will remain unchanged. Another slide on what our risk assessment means in practice. So as you remember, I presented to you the different EU budget areas. So for each of them, we carry out a risk assessment based on the inherent risk, which is mainly considers the type of expenditure, the complexity of the rules, whether it is an entitlement payment, a payment where, for example, a farmer is entitled to a certain amount of money in case that the farmer has sufficient land, or whether it is the payment is made for a cost being incurred, but there are more, in general, more complex EU and national level rules for example, public procurement and state aid rules. So based on these considerations, we divide the EU spending into low risk and high risk. And in the low risk, as I said, there is mostly direct aid for farmers, then payments to students and research fellowship, and also the salaries of public officials working in the European Union. While in the high risk is mostly spending based on cost reimbursement for quite complex infrastructure projects and spending in the area of external actions to countries outside of the European Union. Now, when we carry out our substantive testing, we have to then define whether that transaction is affected by an error or free of error. Then the question is how we define an error. An error for us is the amount of money that should not have been paid out of the EU budget because it was not in compliance with the key regulatory requirements. When we assess whether there is an error or not, we also differentiate whether that error had led to a direct financial impact to the EU budget. This means that if the transaction would have met the regulatory requirements, would the amount paid have been different? So we try to make a difference between errors which, as we say it in our jargon, affect the condition for payment, that the amount of money should have been different, or those which have not. What is also important to highlight is that when we identify an error, our role as auditors is not to look for fraud, but when we identify an error, we have to assess whether there is any suspicion of fraud. And in that case, we are obliged to report to the European investigative bodies. There are two of them, Olaf and the European Public Prosecutor's Office, and they are the ones who are then carrying out the criminal and administrative investigation, and our responsibility stops there. So very quickly, I just repeat that when we identify an error for us, it is important that we differentiate between quantifiable errors, these which have a direct financial impact, and non-quantifiable errors, which are mostly formal issues, non-compliances, but which do not have an impact on the payment from the EU budget. And I think now we come to the last point, which is about how we come to the overall conclusion.
Thank you, Judith. Once we have carried out all these audits, we've tested a sample of transactions, which varies year to year, so it's around 800 transactions these days. And we have a number of errors which we call quantifiable, where we can see the financial impact coming in. Our statisticians who originally have designed the sample, draw the sample, they take the results and they kindly wrote for me the statistical formulas that they are then using, and we are then using to extrapolate the errors, because we consider errors can be extrapolated as they come from the representative random sample. So we do the extrapolation to calculate where we think the true error lies, and this true error lies between what we call upper and lower error limit. That's statistics. So in the midpoint is what we will call estimated level of error. This estimated level of errors tells us whether in the result, in the conclusion, as a result of our substantive testing of a sample of transactions, we see that the error in the budget expenditure as a whole is material, i.e. above 2%, or not, or whether the whole confidence band between upper and lower limit is above or below materiality, or somewhere in the middle. So these are historical results from the last couple of years. So you see, it's always been slightly above 2%, slightly above materiality, the global result for the budget as a whole. So obviously for us as auditors, consideration of materiality is one step in coming to our audit opinion. When we show that the error is material, the other questions we have to ask ourselves whether this is material and pervasive at the same time, because this consideration of pervasiveness obviously will lead us to a different conclusion in terms of opinion, in terms of which modification is going to happen. So that's simply the next step in the process: compiling the results, extrapolating, calculating the estimated level of error together with upper and lower error limits, comparing it into to materiality. You did mention in her part of presentation that we consider low risk and high risk slightly separately, because over time we realized by testing the transactions from the budget that the risk is not spread equally all across the budget. There will be classes of transactions, type of transactions, which are less risky, where there is no error, and those where error is. So that's why, apart from having this as a result for the whole testing, we calculate separately what is the error rate, the estimation of level of error in both groups, low risk and high risk. And consistently over years, the low risk expenditure is clearly not affected by material error. Good news. It's the way we expected it to be when we designed our audit. At the same time, what we call high risk is consistently very high and very much above the materiality. This guides us. This informs our decisions concerning the pervasiveness. So now we have a separate two separate pictures a little bit. Now, obviously, the question is how big they are comparatively in relative terms, whether our final decision will be that the audit opinion is adverse if the error is pervasive, or it's just qualification if we think that pervasiveness is not there. So the answer to this question has been recently that the court clearly says that the error is pervasive. Why? Because this part of the budget in which we find the high error, material error, is much larger than this part of the budget where the error doesn't exist. So these classes of transaction where we have no error, it's, as you see, 60% of high error vis-a-vis 40% of the population where there is no material error, which is a clear indication that the error could and should be considered pervasive. That is why I promised to come back with a last slide with the same slide that was at the beginning. That was why the bottom line is confirming that there is a material error and opinion has to be modified and opinion has to be adverse. So that leads us to the end. We've used our time. We've added 5 minutes as we were allowed to at the beginning. So thank you very much for your attention. We'll be happy to address your comments, answer any questions you might have later. Or now, then depending on the course of action decided by the organizers. Thank you very much.
Obrigado, senhor Maria.
Thank you, Mr. Marius and Ms. Judith. It was a very interesting presentation about how the European Federal Court of Audits makes opinions and with reasonable about balances and the other demonstrations, and how the European Union and all the materiality as well. And I'm sure that the government auditors here of the National Controller's Office and Federal Court of Accounts and other agencies of the country that have been watching the seminar have had this international experience and to inspire and to carry out their works. And under a different model here in Brazil that was detailed in the seminar on Monday afternoon, which presents the opinions that were very similar to what you presented. It is very comforting knowing that we're not alone in this work, and we are using international standards that are adopted by many countries around the world. Let's go to the next presentation. That is going to be presented by James Osborne, Director of Practice and quality of the UK agency NAO. He led for 5 years the financial audit, the business department, the strategy, industrial strategy, along with other government sectors and authorities of research and innovation, and the nuclear decommissioning. He has been performing many roles in many different positions now, such as private secretary of the National Controller's Office and in charge of the auditing in terms of the defense, internal matters, and justice. James is going to approach the topic opinion on irregularity to the procedure of financial procedure. You have the floor, Mr. James.
Eduardo, thank you very much for the introduction, and it's very good to be able to join you all today. Let me just, I have some slides which I will just bring up. Which hopefully you can now see. So as introduced, I've been asked to speak to you about compliance audit carried out in the context of the financial statements in the United Kingdom. In the UK, we call this regularity audit, so that's the concept that you will hear me referring to throughout this presentation. You will see some parallels to the position just set out by colleagues from the European Court of Audit, but also some significant differences to the approach that we have, which I will look to bring out for you, and hopefully that will be of interest for you today. For wider context, in the UK, the Controller Auditor General provides a true and fair opinion on the financial statements of government bodies. So that's a separate audit opinion for each of the departments and their arm's length bodies that are subject to audit. The true and fair opinion is underpinned by an IFRS-based accounting framework adapted to the public sector, and we audit using an application of international auditing standards as adopted for UK companies. The Controller and Auditor General also provides a separate opinion on regularity. So this is the compliance aspect of the work, and this is provided as part of a single audit report on the financial statements. Importantly, as part of the process for annual reporting, accounting officers of government bodies have a responsibility for ensuring the regularity of the transactions their organisations undertake, and are also required to make attestations to that effect in their annual reports, which are subject to audit. So I'm going to talk now a bit about the basis for the compliance audit work that we do in the UK, or the regularity opinion that we provide. In our context, it's not conducted in accordance with ISI standards. Instead, we have a dedicated practice note in the UK, which is issued by the UK's Financial Reporting Council in consultation with the UK Public Audit Forum. This practice note provides guidance on the application of international auditing standards to the public sector context, for example, around going concern or fraud, but also sets out the framework for the audit of regularity. The practice note is issued and approved under the same processes applying to other UK statements of recommended practice and owned by the Financial Reporting Council, which also approves for issue international accounting and auditing standards for use in the UK. The guidance on the audit of regularity is underpinned by the principle in the international auditing standards and also parallels to the ISI standards, and in particular has similarities to the audit of laws and regulations under the International Auditing Standard 250. So let me talk about what is regularity in the context that we audit in the UK. And on what basis do we provide our regularity opinion? Regularity is a central feature of our work and is often the area that attracts the greatest public and parliamentary interest when we are reporting. The requirement to audit regularity is set out in primary legislation through the Government Resources and Accounts Act, and the Controller and Auditor General has extensive powers to issue long-form reports where significant regularity issues are identified. What is regularity? Well, fundamentally, in our context, regularity is about whether resources, which includes income and expenditure, have been used in accordance with Parliament's intention. Parliament's intention is set out through the framework of authorities for each body, which has 4 key components. Firstly, the authorising legislation. So this is the legislation, usually an act of Parliament, that sets up a body and specifies what its purpose or functions are, i.e. what it can do. And if a body goes outside of those authorisations, that would be considered ultra vires and irregular. Secondly, there's the governing legislation. These are usually regulations issued under governing legislation which govern specific areas of an entity's activities. For example, it might set out annual rates for statutory fees which can be collected, or specify the amounts at which benefit entitlements can be paid. Finally, thirdly, we talk about parliamentary authorities. The main one of these is called the Supply and Appropriation Act, and this is the mechanism by which Parliament votes resources to government bodies each year. These are limits, effectively budgetary limits, which those bodies must comply with for that particular year, and a breach of those limits is a breach of the parliamentary authorities through the Supply and Appropriation Act. And finally, there's a set of delegated authorities, many of these owned by the Treasury Department in the UK, and these are delegated authorities passed from Parliament but exercised by government. These authorities are set out in a document, primarily in a document called Managing Public Money, which details specific rules and principles on the use of resources with which bodies are required to comply. It's also useful to talk about regularity in terms of what it isn't and what isn't covered by a regularity opinion, as well as defining what it is. And we have and for this purpose, it's useful to consider the separate concept of propriety, which we also look at, but which is not covered by our audit opinion. So whereas regularity is concerned with compliance with appropriate authorities, propriety is concerned more with standards of conduct, behaviour, and corporate governance. Both concepts are defined in Managing Public Money for the UK context, as issued by the UK Treasury. And as I said, whereas regularity is covered by our audit opinion, propriety, which is inherently more subjective, isn't. However, propriety can also be the subject of the CNAG's long-form reporting if issues emerge, and where we see issues of regularity, there are often issues of propriety also associated with the instances that we've identified. The majority of the time, the outcome of a regularity audit is a reasonable assurance opinion without qualification. The text here on this slide shows the opinion wording that we would use in our audit report. For all bodies, the opinion provides assurance that income and expenditure have been applied to the purposes intended by Parliament, and that's a positive assurance opinion. For departments, it also includes an opinion that control totals, or effectively the budgets voted by Parliament, this comes back to the Parliamentary Authorities through the Supply and Appropriations Act, have not been exceeded. And I'll come on to talk about the consequences if they're exceeded in just a minute. But these are the two components of the opinion, and in the absence of any material issues being identified, this will be the assurance that is provided to users of these reports. I wanted to go on to talk a bit about what does this mean in practice, and to illustrate that through some examples of where we've qualified our regularity opinions and what that looks like, and in terms of the sorts of issues that we're highlighting and providing assurance on, because also it obviously illustrates that in the absence of reporting on these issues, we are providing assurance that these issues aren't present. So the first example I'd like to speak about is around a breach of spending limit. Parliament, and if these are exceeded, and if they're exceeded at all, so even by £1, any spend above the limit is deemed to be irregular, and in that circumstance, we would qualify our audit opinion, as we did for the Serious Fraud Office in 2020-21. In that case, the matter arose as a result of needing to recognise provisions in respect of failed court cases which they hadn't anticipated in their budgets and which led to an overspend. The assurance underpinning the opinion here is derived from the work on the truth and fairness of the underlying financial statements. So in signing off the truth and fairness of the financial statements, we have assurance over the outturn that is being reported to the level of materiality that is audited to for the financial statements, and that then translates into an opinion on whether the spending limits have been exceeded. In the second example, I want to look at benefit expenditure. So in the UK, this is managed by our Department for Work and Pensions. Benefit entitlement is set out in governing legislation, and where payments are made at an incorrect amount or to ineligible people, they are deemed to be irregular, and where material, we would then qualify our audit opinion. So this is an example where we would need to do work to gain assurance over to understand the level of error within the population of benefit payments, and to apply materiality and statistical techniques in reaching that view. The third example looks at fraud. So under Practice Note 10, which is the practice note governing the audit of regularity, fraud is always considered to be irregular because it can never be in accordance with Parliament's intent. And we've seen, we have examples where we estimate that there are material levels of fraud present within financial statements that are prepared and reported, and in recent times we've seen that within COVID-19 support schemes. So, for example, we've had losses arising from pandemic loans given to small businesses which were obtained fraudulently, which were subject to government guarantees, and the losses experienced by government there as a result of fraud are deemed to be irregular, and they've led to qualification of the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy financial statements as a result of that fraud in 2020-21. We're still, there's still a lot of work ongoing to put a more precise estimate on the level of fraud present within those schemes, because obviously that could be quite a difficult thing to estimate. But we have had evidence, and as indicated by our audit work, that it has been at least material in the period in which those loans were issued. In practice, of course, there is some overlap between the two examples. I've given their examples 2 and 3, because often it is not possible to distinguish between fraud and error when conducting audit work, but both can result in irregular expenditure and are reported on together, both through our audit opinion and where there are material issues through our long-form reporting. In the context of the Department for Work and Pensions, this is a long-standing issue, and one in which we have been reporting over many years over progress in reducing the levels of fraud and error within the different benefit streams. And a final example, which deals with breaches of the control framework, which is set under delegation. In this case, I've brought out an example around the breach of procurement controls, where an entity didn't get authority to enter into contracts, which were specified as requiring approval, and we deemed that the spend under those contracts was material in this context, and therefore led to qualification. Other examples commonly considered in this category relate to pay to senior staff, where they're subject to explicit approvals or exit packages when people leave office. So my final 3 slides are going to come on just to look at detail some of the work we do in auditing regularity and some of the key considerations around how we do that audit work. These are derived from the practice note opinion. Often, the base position for materiality in respect of regularity will be the same. So commonly, we would use 1 to 2% of expenditure as the materiality base for our work on the true fair opinion, and we would apply the same criteria in the first instance to the work of regularity. However, we can have a lower materiality threshold for regularity. It can be set separately, and irregular transactions are where irregular transactions are identified, they may commonly be deemed material by nature. This is bringing out the level of public and parliamentary interest in some of these areas, and indeed for those who are managing the framework of authorities, is significant. Therefore, we need to be highly attuned to the particular elements of the financial statements that may be of more interest to Parliament or other users in terms of regularity, and consider what we would deem material for these, both at planning and when we're evaluating errors. In short, which areas of the financial statements can be more susceptible to regularity risks? Possible answers for this include grant expenditure, senior staff pay, exit packages, related party transactions, and an area of expenditures which are explicitly covered by spending controls. So in the example of procurement, if there are spending controls set at lower limits than the materiality that you would usually apply for your true and fair, you may need to do testing to those lower limits to understand whether there have been breaches. Context is really important here. In applying the evaluative materiality, we may also consider qualitative factors such as intent, the history of irregularity for a particular entity, and indeed whether any corrective action has been taken after it's been identified in order to resolve the issues that gave rise to the regularity breach. Linked to what I've just described in terms of materiality and considering how materiality may vary depending on the nature of the issues identified, our audit of regularity is a risk-based approach. So firstly, it's essential that we understand the framework of authorities that applies to an entity. And this can be complex because it will depend on the specific legislation that applies to an individual entity and also how the entity has been set up and therefore which elements of the framework of authorities apply and how. In some cases, the entity may have delegations or for kind of approvals within a control framework, which they can operate themselves or can be operated by a sponsor body, rather than being a necessary recourse to the centre of government in the form of Her Majesty Treasury. It's important to say that we don't set out to audit the regularity of all transactions in the financial statements on a substantive basis. Instead, we assess where the areas of risk are for our regularity audit and what we need to gain assurance over. The aim is to identify those areas where there could potentially be material irregularity, either quantitatively or qualitatively, and then design an approach to address those risks. So this may include interrogating requirements into the work performed for the true and fair opinion, for example, and adding in testing requirements linked to those tests in order to gain assurance, for example, around grant expenditure transactions, which we would also be testing for that purpose. So finally, just to illustrate the types of testing that we might see when we're performing our audit work on regularity, and here are some examples. So these are the sorts of tests which you where that would be effective, particularly, for example, over grants. And this may be the case where grants are being paid out by an entity and they have controls in place to go and gain assurance themselves that those grants are being utilised for the purposes that they've been awarded, which would also come under the remit of the organisation and the requirement of parliamentary intent. Secondly, we'll often look at key items where there's a greater risk of a material breach. So doing 100% testing on senior staff pay approvals where there is a requirement for approvals, or indeed similarly around exit packages. I talked briefly about how we would do integrated testing between the audit of our true and fair opinion and the audit of regularity, and that either through controls or substantive testing. So for example, where we're testing income transactions, looking at the statutory fees rates that are set out in legislation and confirming that income has been collected at the correct rate will inform the work on income recognition, that would also inform the work on whether the income that's collected is regular in accordance with the legislation that has been approved. Reliance on management's testing can also be a key input, subject to the necessary audit overlay to make sure that we can take assurance from it. In particular, where we do work looking to evaluate the level of fraud and error within particular transaction streams, particularly for high volume, low value transaction streams such as the benefit streams, the first port of call would be for us to look at how the work that management has done to understand the level of fraud and error present in those populations, and to do an evaluation as to whether management's assessment is reasonable. And finally, another key aspect here is on consulting relevant authorities where there are points of contention. So particularly where there are delegated approvals or where there are needs to get a central approval for certain courses of action or transactions, it can be necessary to liaise with the relevant authorities to understand the scope of those requirements, and also an understanding of the extent to which exceptions have been approved either prospectively or retrospectively within the system. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, which hopefully illustrates for you the approach that we take in the UK to the audit of regularity. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, James. Foi uma palestra também muito interessante, muito.
It was a very interesting presentation. We saw here a different. Actually, that's not a Court of Accounts, right? It's another agency of control that emits two opinions: opinion about reliability of the and the regularity of the and the reliability of this balance, and also the opinion of regularity here. It's similar to our compliance of the Act of Management that with a normative instruction 84 published in 2020 in TCU, and has been guiding the certification of accounts, especially in the year of 2021. Thank you very much, James. Your presentation showed us a lot of insights in terms of integration between the teams here and that conducts to financial audit and compliance audit as well. That was a challenge that I mentioned at the beginning, and we're trying to overcome here and deal here within our court. Before passing the floor for the next speaker, Dr. Maria De Luz, I'd like to correct myself here, because at the beginning of the seminar I didn't agree to my boss, the general coordinator of external control of the public accounts, Thiago Dutra, and this failure in reality is due to the fact that he has a crucial role not only for this work and the interaction of the panelists, but the structure of the seminar itself that was very well thought out. But he has been a leader here in the Brazil in terms of evolving our model of both the certification of accounts and of checking of accounts. So our auditing process has been evolving a lot, starting with it. And he is my work colleague. We've been partners, but due to his role, fundamental role in all of this process. First, I'd like to make an introduction of Dr. Maria De Luz, that she's a judge in Portugal, and she has a degree in a technical degree in the University of Lisbon, and she works in the Court of Accounts since 2018 in the area of checking of accounts. She is the member of the rules of auditing, and since 2019 she is the coordinator of the work group for the creation of the handbook of compliance, and she is responsible for the group along with the European lab with molecular biology, and she is responsible for the team of the European team for the exploration of meteorological satellites. And the period of between 2017 and 2020, she is the coordinator of the technical team, and she's in charge of responsible the checking of account and audits in the platform, considering the new accounting system for public administration, as well as the norm systems for the accounting platform. And for the agencies that for the public that is non-profit. And before being a judge, Dr. Maria De Luz acted in different functions as a judge of the Court of Accounts of Portugal. She was the coordinator judge in the checking of the accounts area and in previous checking also, and she did previous jobs in the court. And she's also a member. She has been a member of technical teams that perform technical review, peer-reviewed, which it was the case of the French Court of Accounts and the European Court of Accounts. And she has worked as the Portuguese representative Court of Accounts in works and public accounting and other topics related to the public sector. So we're surely going to have a very good presentation with a lot of learnings that we're going to have. And Dr. Maria De Luz, please, now you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Virginia. I really thank for the words, and I would like to greet all the colleagues here. And it's a great privilege for me to be present in this seminar, International Seminar of Public Accounts, which is a very good topic and that represents for the accounting court to have a great challenge. I think the invitation that was done by you, your account courts, and I would like to express in my experience some of the procedures that we have done the account verification, and so we can verify the accounts of the state and some of the control units that the account court made, so we can have some conformity with the financial transactions. So I would like to take advantage of the opportunity to share my screen. I believe that, can you see that? So I can see everything that the Court of Account has been doing in this matter. And so this is a matter that it's a little different from the approach we have been listening before, but I would like to express what was the costs and the competences of the Court of Accounts that have been performing in our organic law and according to our constitution in the Portugal Republic. So this constitution is from the 1997, and it's also crossing data with the budgetary law that has given some competences to the Court of Accounts. So in this case, what was given to us in the new budgetary law was so that the Court of Accounts should make a certification of the state accounts. So in the competences of the court should be fiscalize the regularity and legality of the revenues and the public expenses and what will be submitted. So what we are talking here is that we are talking about 6,000 entities that are putting the accounts, and then the Court of Accounts can also effectuate some responsibility by the financial infractions. So there is a great challenge so that the Court of Accounts can obstruct the budgetary law to certificate the general accounts of the state, so we can make a budget for the programs and establishing the rules for the financial side, and to make a balance to the public accounts so they can be individual and they can be consigned accounts. So we also have to see our functions and competencies. The Court of Account has also the control on the legality that was first done by tools with the previous verification of contracts and accounts and the fiscalization of these revenues and public expenses that normally pass through a analysis of legality and regularity of the institutions, of the observance of rules and the regularity of the consolidation. So the control of this regularity, as I said, can bring to the judging of the responsible for the financial infractions, and for this reason, the court should establish some audits for setting up who is responsible. So in these modalities of the financial control, the court is divided by sections. The first section is the previous fiscalization. Here comes all the contracts, the regularity of the public contract hiring, and also have a control of the simultaneous fiscalization, and it's been done by the successive fiscalization. And also there is the financial responsibility effectivation, which is done by the certification of account. This certification of account was done by accounting that was a public accounting that was very simple. We have done on a basis of a cash flow and had a approach much of a flow of income and payments, and regarding the junctions and the adaptation as these adaptations were introduced, the court has been saying exactly what how the account verification should be done. So I should confirm the part of the conformity of the principles and the judicial laws in such a way, in the budgetary laws, and above all, to see the regularity of the subjacent norms that are along with it. So to have this control, the kind of a court has a great dimension once that we are not making the verification of the accounts of other states, but as the other entities like that are under the jurisdiction of a Court of Accounts. So in this logic, that the Court of Account will promote the certification of account for those who generate financial costs. So the checking of account will be associated to the accountability in a judicial sense and an ethical sense that will transcend the checking of account in the meaning of a accounting. So if in the first moment the Court of Account was questioning the legality of the accounts, the concept of the legality as the public administration will evolve, it will take a modulation of this external financial control. So from 2015, a little historically speaking, it was mentioned to the problems Portugal was facing due to debts we had before. We see that there is a demand that the accounting systems should change and that the public system should adopt a new accounting system. And for this reason, this has made a new system of budgetary law. And for this reason, we created new laws that, in some extent, are structural for our public finances. So we had a great change of systems, budgetary systems, accounting systems, a new way to frame the budget. And it was implemented in 2015. In the Court of Account, we had an opportunity that we needed to change the way we were checking the accounts. Some of the financial audit had to do new ways. We also had a new competence from the court to certify the accounts. We had the need of review the instructions, but above all, we needed to change the information system. So it was necessary to have a accounting harmonization around the public financing systems, and this was an imperative to guarantee a regularity on the information, to increase the public credibility, to provide a trustworthiness on the public finances and the information that was provided. And with that, we see that there was the need of to make available all the instructions of the court to those who were involved in the process. And the court needed also to show how these counts were checked. And it was checked by indication of the 6,500 entities that were around this process. And I would say that these entities were done by hand, and with great difficulty we had to deal with all the information. And then we ended up to implement the norms, the international norms of accounting to the public sector. So here we saw the opportunity to carry out some of the new norms in a process of consolidation that could be accomplished, and in the end, to make that our checking of accounts could be done by means of the electronic means. So our goal was to make normal, to make that the entities could actually send us the data in a way that they could be actually dealt. So in the Court of Accounts, the group of work got to design 4 great accounting points of perspective. So we established some guidelines for all the small entities, the micro entities that had peripheral services. We adopted the norms of accounting for the great banks and the entities that should be compared in an international way, and then we adopted the norms in the accounting system to a non-profit sector. And then the tribunal studied which were the amount of in the regime, and this study was performed with a accounting normalization and with the financing ministry. And there was a technical team created so we could implement, and these entities were considered like small entities, micro entities, regarded the dimension of the budget they had. So after this introduction, we have been implementing this process in the past 3 years, and as it was, the court decided to choose a electronic platform to have it as the only point of delivery of accounts. And so the account checking services, they should deliver their results in this platform, and their algorithms and the rules between the ministries of finances and the Court of Accounts and the entities, they should be checked always. And then the court could understand and know when the accounts were delivered, and then we could see the size of the information and check then along with the other system of information that are supplementary. So with that we could see how the accounts would get here, and also we could have a better financial control to facilitate, normalize, and consolidate all that financing information. With that, our infrastructure, technological infrastructure, was widened and developed. So the Code of Accounts doesn't only have external verification processes, internal verification process, but we also have external verification process that are done through the financial audits, and if the operations are legal and regular, they can be very trustworthy for us. So, however, we saw that these audits could not only be financial, but they should be looked in a logic of conformity. Once that they had the authorization of the other entities and the way that the financial audit was done, and it was introduced so that the audit could be better done. Once that we found the financial infractions, we could make a report of these audits for the responsibility, financial responsibility report. So, and then our section, our financial section normally make these judgments. And then in the conformity audit, we needed to develop these methodologies because we are very worried about the transparency issue, accountability, and the governance and the way these audits were performed. We could actually then see how they could be applied in the financial management process. And then the entities could apply of course, these cara, tô travando.
To the works of certification of the reports of certifications of accounts. And at a first moment, we have and we select and we audit many different components of this balances, all of them preparatory work to start the certification of this general account. And this criteria of compliance are usually based on changing budgetary rules, and they're prevalent in bills and contracts and public policies that are established, that are effectively known. And we know that all of these criteria have to be reliable, objective, comparable, and acceptable and available. And according to the compliance here, it allowed us to have these as audits of judges of audits. So that's why they have to include an information and a judge that is beneficial to normalize the decision that was included in the reports and balances as well. They have to make a decision about it, and they determined rules that are favorable and also a concept of decision. What are the situations? What are the moments that had to be harmonized in order for our auditors to do this kind of assessment? Of course, and in many different irregularities as well. And of course, they have to be analyzed, and they have to be analyzed at the same time as the accounts. I've already described and made it evident how the accounts of TCU are being made. So there are many types and modalities, but there is another reality that we have to be concerned. We improved a lot with the electronic platform, with the checking of accounts, and when we connect it to the Ministry of Finance, because they do all of the budgetary control. And after that, at the end of the year, when the accounts have been checked, to the Court of Accounts with the deliveries, and after that there is a report that is made online, and all of the entities of the organization and the sector get this information. This information that is online, all of them, the departments can check this information, and they make it easy to articulate the Department of Checking of Accounts, which was created in 2018 to prepare these works, and to the department that issues this. So the certification of accounts, it starts as a way for us to strengthen the role that the Court of Accounts, it has to be the promoter of accountability, and based on the legality, regularity, and the reliability of public accounts sector accounts, according to methods and rules of financial and audit. And these methods, these are the rules that are adopted by the Portuguese Federal Accounts for compliance. And in the end, all of these instruments of control allow the court to assess public program certification of accounts and the effectiveness of social responsibility. And here, in 2023, we can determine the goals and the accounts that we're going to audit, an approach that is based on risk, that is supported by evidence of the auditing, when to know whether this is based according to material relative, the aspects that are material relative, and to decide to create this decision about the reliability of the state current accounts. And with this, we identified a group of risk for the certification. The risk of recognizing the perimeter and the fulfilling and the external control system that is adopted in every area of the state, and the ways that the reliability are applied, and the use of the technology in this process of identification and risk, and especially whether there is a lack or risks in the implementation of the systems of implementation. And the digital way, and that's why it's important to get this information and for the signatures and these minutes to be transmitted to the court. And they are developed, and all the certification of accounts as well, to improve the quality. Since there is so much information in the electronic platform, more and more we had the need to get auditors and financial analysts and specialists to use this information, this financial balance and financial information. We're using the information that is in the platform. We defined a group of ratios in the economic, and to develop exactly this risk model, and we managed to assess for the financial control that of the federal accounts to contribute to the reform of public accounts. This information is relevant for the Federal Court of Accounts. In relation to the foreign activity in terms of external control, we're not going to talk about it. There will be another presentation of that was responsible to this that is going to be useful to hear this presentation to compare to this as the Court of Accounts as an external auditor with many years of experience and the invitations of the international organizations. And that is it. And as usual, so the presentation was super fast. Interpretation apologizes. It's impossible to interpret in this space of speaking. And the regulations that are connected to these financial transactions and everything, and how this all relates to the emitting of the opinions. And we could see some points that are very interesting, such as the reform that was carried out in Portugal with many recent laws that changed the accounting systems that are considered structuring for Portuguese finances. And I'd like to mention that Brazil is also thinking about new changes, as we saw on Monday morning, with the proposal of a new code of public finances. In her presentation, there was the adoption also the adoption of the systems of IT to provide support to all of the process, as well as the electronic platform that was mentioned. Thank you. Now we're going to go to the last presentation of this morning, that will be carried out by Jean-Paul Michet from the French Federal Court of Accounts. And he works as a council member of the Court of Accounts, of the French Court of Accounts, since 2006. He has vast experience in audits, and also he is a senior specialist of the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund specialist. He's going to work about the experience of the French Court of Accounts and international organizations and institutions. Please, Mr. Jean-Michel, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Eduardo, for the presentation. I also thank the colleagues for the presentations that were very dense and interesting. I'm not going to manage to pass the slide, and I'll have to say next when the next slide is necessary. In a few words, I'd like to make this presentation to remember the scenario of the Court of Accounts in French, or Cour des Comptes, in terms of financial audit and compliance audit, because the goal of my presentation is to show the experience in the international experience, what it has given us. So I'm not going to go into details, our activities here. I'd like to make a summary to help us understand better. And before I start the presentation, I'm going to say one thing. The Court of Accounts of France has the responsibility to give an opinion in audit on the Court of Accounts of France, on the budget of the state, according to the ESI rule standards since 2005. In reality, the certification, the audit opinion is mentioned on the general accounts of the state, but it's worth mentioning that we also make 9 audit opinions on components of our system of social security. Each year, there are 10 audit opinions, one about the general accounts of the state, which means that considering it's only one opinion, there is a lot of materiality. I was very interested in what the British colleague mentioned in terms of the material aspects, and the new opinions about Social Security go beyond the details because they're smaller volumes. The second thing is that we have an annual activity in terms of issuing reports about the execution of the budget in terms of compliance and also in terms of sustainability. And the third thing that I'd like to remember is that our common activity in the Court of Accounts, and there are 7 chambers now, which we call in French les contrôles. That means a mix of a compliance audit and a performance audit as well. And the performance audit is included in this control activity, and it really relates to good management. And the last thing that I'd like to say before we start is that we have competence of judgment or of decision of accounts, and it's going to be changed because instead of encompassing the accounts and the accounting process, it's going to encompass the responsibility of all of the public managers. That is, the audit of compliance is also going to be included in the procedure of checking of accounts. Considering this perspective in a summarized manner of the activity of the court, I'd like to go into the presentation of this experience is international auditing. Okay. I'm not sure whether you can see the information on the screen. I would like to have here on my screen a more detailed view here to say that our experience of 30 years in international auditing institutions, and this table, it shows a global view of the different mandates that we had during these 30 years, the diversity of the agencies and institutions in terms of volume, financial volume, and you can see when you considered the right part of this table that there is an increase in the volume of international auditing. There was definitely a learning period during this over the past few years. And I'd like to highlight a key year, which is the year of 2001. After 2001, the Court of Accounts, the Federal Court of Accounts, and considering the inside rules of finances, it was put in place was put in charge to give an opinion, an audit opinion. In 2001, we started a training period, intensive training period of the auditors about financial audits. Before that, there was some specialists, but very few. And the part of financial audit in terms of the international mandates was made by internal auditors and people that were recruited from outside the court. I'm not going to go into details here because it's basically impossible here to talk about the slide, but I just wanted to remind you the extreme complexity of the United Nations systems. And considering that our experience encompasses and other institutions and it goes beyond the UN, as the previous slide was also shown. So there is a learning process and the familiarization with the system of the United Nations, and because it is extremely complex and it'll take a long time. With the current situation, we have mandates in the systems of the United Nations, and other mandates of external audit and concerning other institutions such as the OECD, the International Criminal Court, Interpol, that it might not. Oh, it's the Francophone or the French-speaking international organization, the OEF and the European Union, and the Concilium. And so you can have a modern view of our portfolio in terms of audits. Next. I'd like to highlight here some mandates that were finished recently. The program, the World Food Program, was an experience that was extremely interesting, and it finished in 2021. But the work, and especially in the last year, that was covered by the auditing process, but the work was finished in 2022, and the International Criminal Court, the work was renewed as well, and Interpol as well, and the OSCE, with headquarters in Vienna, Organization for the European Cooperation Security. And concerning the first part of this presentation, this general overview of these 30 years, I'd like to make some comments in the following observations. These entities are very different in terms of size, budget, activity, and we had to make a huge effort to adapt to this diversity. And something that was built over time was some sort of experience of international recognition that made the coup de camp the candidate and would be selected for many different mandates. What was also fundamental was the continuous support of our first presidents, which allowed us to continue and to mobilize some of the internal resources. And most of our colleagues that participate in this, they have another activity as well in different chambers in the court. And that's why there is a need for us to mobilize human resources and for us to have a view and to provide support for the president. Without the support of the first president, it wouldn't have been possible. I'm going to share an experience here, which is easy to understand, that every president of chamber that naturally, when they have the human resources and the personnel to effect this national program, the Department of People in charge of the auditing, the international audit, which is responsible to get these resources.
So there is a need to have a arbitrary point of perspective from the first president to have a balance that was built over time. And this was experience of a institutional level that we have, and the international audit brought to us. The judicial basis for this activity in an international way, it's very simple. A call, a appeal of candidacy from the institutional behalf, the financial rules that the organization foresees, and the admission letter, and that they are all the same on the basis. In terms of audit, the base of our work is very simple and standardized. So the norms of the financial audit, the ESI norms, which they give more details compared to the ISA, and the basis of our financial audit is the rules of the organizations, which mention in a general norm the ISA norms, and in a more general way the habitual norms of the audit professional. So also the judicial bases are the norms, the professional norms, which refer to the ISA norms regarding the field certification. These are the basis of a work that we have each time we are a candidate to a new mandate, and we have to highlight. Regarding the accounting norms in a general way, the international organizations, they adopted the APES, and the formal adoption of the APES are not satisfying yet, but they are the point of reference for us. And so when you talk about the audit management, when I talk about it, I mentioned something that is the compliance audit are mentioned and connected to this management audit regarding the institutional rules. So the norms of the management rules are the ones you know already. These are the ESI, the compliance audit, and the financial public conformity. So this basis is similar to the basis we use for our internal work related to the certification of the court. So the financial rules of the international entity. My comment I would like to do on this part is on these norms and bases is that when the international audit started in the end of the 80s, the French court didn't have adopted the international rules yet. So the audit work done in an international way, and the fact of candidating ours for several mandates was a very good incentive to make us adopt in a more effective way the international norms throughout the years. So for this reason, I would like to say that the international audit practice helped the Code of Conduct to obtain the best international patterns that would not have reached if we only focused on the international level. So I would like to share this experience with that all my generation colleagues could also share, that the international audit practice help in the norm incorporation, and it's a tool to make it more effective in the future. I would like now to go into details and take the UN as example. The UN, because it's impossible to summarize the context of each one of the entities that I mentioned previously. Our mandate, that is the most important one, is the UN audit, and we have joined this mandate in July 1st of this year. So I would like to comment and express the base of this activity, mean that other mandates of external audit could be a little more different, but basically what we saw on the UN can be applied to the biggest part of the entities I had mentioned in the beginning. The need of external audit was born along with the United Nations in December 1946, in which the General Assembly established a external board committee would dictate the accounts, the funds of the United Nations, as well as the programs, and would communicate the reports and the installations, recommendations of the General Assembly. Each word here that's highlighted in this text constitute a framework and the limits of our activity. Actually, the audit reports of the UN are in charge of and have the specialty of the budgetary and administrative topics. Next. It's worth remembering that juridically, the external audit is the chief of the control institution, the ISC. It's not the country, it's not a group of magistrates or workers. And by imposition of UN from 1946, it was established a committee of 3 people in which the mandate that this committee receives they should conduct a independent audit based on the acquisition of the compliance of the international law. So this base has not changed from 1946 and up to now. More details of the external and internal auditor. It is on the financial rules of the United Nations, particularly on the Article 7 that expresses how the board is sanctioned and the duration and the norms are done in the audit activity. It's worth underlining 2 articles or rules of this set. The 7.6 mentions that with no question or with clarity the principle of independence of the external auditor. And the 7.5 should be read carefully because each one of these words has a impact of the audit execution. The audit mandate consists the audit mandate for the management audit is a definition that goes beyond the financial audit because the financial audit is based on the ISSA norms and there is no way of exception and inclusion on the regularity audit, and this is a financial audit and it's an opinion of audit that is thoroughly based on international norms. Regarding the management audit, the base of the work management of this committee deals with the procedures, efficiency of the accounting system, as well as I have to look at the other screen because I cannot see. Anyhow, so and the efficiency of the administrative procedures of management. It's worth to notice that this definition is very wide, including the efficiency, and it doesn't exclude the conformity. The truth is that, along with the independence principle that is very wide of the management audit, provides the audit committee a great liberty to define the content of the adjacent part of its report, because the one part is of the financial report and the rest can be in conformity of this definition that's very aberrant. Throughout the years, we had relationship problems with the audit committee, and for this reason, in 2002, the General Assembly of UN took a formal resolution which objective was to remember a independence, complete independence of audit, and this resolution reminds the contradiction principle resolution, which is the critiques that the external audit pretends to formulate should be communicated previously to the UN authorities for contradiction. This is so that we can say that based on our rules and the 2002 resolution is comfortable to compose and adopt a audit program in two parts. The first is the financial audit, along with the international standards, and the management audit that each country can define in the boundaries that are very flexible. Next. This rule forces the access to the documents which are basic rules that should not be commented beyond, but in the national area it exists also in the entities of UN that in the carry out of the audit we should have the free access to without restriction, and the principle of contradiction was remembered in the financial rules. It's worth remembering that the audit committee is composed by the chiefs of ESC. They do not administrate, and they did not do the operational work. So throughout the years, the operation is done by the audit operations committee, which chief is the representative of one of the card of accounts. Nowadays, the chief is the president of the card of accounts from Chile, and the other members are French and Chinese. Our French representative just entered in the beginning of this month of July. The comment I would like to make on this basis is on this external audit system is that the principle of independence was remembered and reformulated by the General Assembly the rights were also assured by the General Assembly, which is the entity of this entity. I would like now to summarize in few words our organization, how the French Court of Accounting is organized to assume these responsibilities. I have already said that the auditioner is the first chief, is from the ESC, because the mandate is personal, but the technical support is provided by the General Secretariat, and in the General Secretariat by the DRIAEF, the external audit department from the Francophonie, which is a entity that deals with the international cooperation of audit, and in this department there is another department for the external audit management. And each mandate that I remembered before, each one of them, they have a manager in charge of organizing the work of audit, with two chiefs of UR chiefs and the temporal participation of them. Some auditors work on the external audit in full work. They are permanent teams. They are specialized magistrates and specialists of management from the UN, because as I have already mentioned, the complexity in the operations in the UN demands that we understand the difficulties and have a specialist inside. So to recruit the teams and specialized magistrates with previous experience, international audit, so that's a requirement for us. But we also have part-time teams, which are people, magistrates and non-magistrates from the Court of Accounts, of the regional chambers, and the process of application and training they have been being taken. So many of our consultants, they do not work on the international audit, but what has some disadvantages, but also great the advantages. This slide is just to remember that a important work is to create the audit tools, because each auditioner from the UN should establish his rules, create the audit norms, and update the guides for each organization, the audit guides for the institutional headquarters and on the fields, and to establish the strategies for the audit programs. And that's why we are also doing a very heavy work. And these tools are not for the external audit committee. So the control supervisioning management office should create its own tools. So my comment here on this part is to produce adequate tools and updated ones. It's a very demanding work, but what I would also like to say is that the fact that many members from the teams work in a partial time on the audit has some disadvantages, like negotiating the participation in terms of time. But the great advantage is that when this colleague come back to the chambers, or the chambers come back to the national work, be it of the compliance audit or the management audit, they can diffuse and transmit the experience, the practices of the international committees, which saves us a very valuable time. I would like now to make some comments in terms of sharing our experience with general comments. The first comment was that the mandate goes beyond the financial audit because the financial audit is done on basis of the common norms, the standard norms, but what is done by the management audit doesn't have strict boundaries, which provides a very appreciated freedom to the external audit. We should remember that the report basis is always the financial audit, and the other audits come in the report, in a wider report, and each report has its division in one financial part, and then with differences in a meaningful way depending on the country or institution. And the second part is the performance audit, the compliance audit, the management audit. So here we include the two ones that are taken into account. The principles, the independence principles were reaffirmed along the time with the different entities. It was necessary because the relationship in a general terms, I'm not talking about the UN, but the relationship between the administrative part and of the institutions not always is easy in function of the differences that have been found in a new country. To say concretely, we are now taking again the activity of the German Court of Accounts. We had several meetings, many discussions in the meaning of the maintaining a continuity of not having big change that would not be very understood by the auditees, but the work should be very delicate, and for this reason, it's good. It's good that the entity that sees a new auditor should not refuse or criticize the approach. I would like to say that the relationship with the German Court of Accounts was very positive, and the beginning of this mandate in the UN was relatively acceptable. I would like to say sorry for this part that is still in French, but I would like only to say a comment that's not difficult to understand. Here when say the certification usefulness of the state's account. So when we talk about the audit, financial audit on the general account and the social security are very useful. Previously, our mandates didn't have a national practice of financial audit. Nowadays, of financial audit in the Court of Accounts, we can face with more facility the challenges of the financial audit of the international entities, being that each magistrate, auditioner that participates on both of them can witness a synergy and in relationship between the national audit and international one. The participation in these two modes in the same mission of financial audit has been reviewed as very positive. For this reason, the financial audit and the management audit of the international institutions has been reviewed easier after 2005, when we started to issue the audit opinions of the French state. And then the methodology, the approach of the audit in the international missions, and due to the auditioners' participation in partial time, was divulgated, shared in further national chambers and regional that we have in the different regions of France. And the diffusion of methodology is a experience, a consequence of this experience that I would like to mention, because it is extremely positive. It's worth remembering that in our court, the magistrate statutes, because we are all of us magistrates, contrarily of what we see in other countries in which there is the statute, a constitution of what means to be a magistrate or an auditioner, or what is to be integrated in the selective process, maintaining the independence of opinion. This decision was helped by the experience of international audit. Another positive consequence, and I would like to share, is that our relationship with other countries and other Code of Accounts that are involved in cooperation with the because we are involved with them, especially the French speaker ones. This type of cooperation was helped by the international audit experience. This experience helped a lot in our relationship. I will go to Nigeria, for example, to Senegal, to participate in cooperation operations, and you see that these have a very positive effect. And what I would like also to mention at last is that the fact of the consecution and participation of our colleagues in Intosai also revealed more adequate and easier in base of the audit, international audit experience. Next. I had done the Portuguese translation, but I didn't take the French slides too. It's only a repetition of what I have already said. I would like to thank the opportunities to share our experience and apologize because we couldn't make a deeper description in a French level, but the demand and what was the purpose here was to share in a more concrete way what this third-year term experience has shown us in the area of the compliance audit and financial audit, and the other areas that we have to assume. So thank you very much, all of you, for your attention. And I noticed that my Portuguese should be a little more fluent, but I would say so. I just like to have this opportunity to speak in English to practice a little better. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jean-Michel. We could understand everything you said. It was great, and it was good because, again, we can see that we'll ask for your opinion and your wisdom again in the case of the financial audit that we see here. The wide experience of the French court in the international organisms brought several points that we have to think, and also we see the opportunity that will be to participate in case that our candidacy is confirmed, and we will recur to you again so we can get more of these details that you couldn't bring to us but have already served to us, so to see how the checking accounts can really help in our experience. Since our time is already, we are running out of time and some of our speakers have some strict time, I would pass the form. We'll go to the debate section. We have some questions to do, and then we will follow the order of presentations starting from the European court, and then I'm gonna ask that we can start with our friend now, because we would like to not have him to have a perception over a point that he can really provide us some insights. It's about these points we have said in the seminar, which is the team integration between the adjacent transactions and the procedures for the trustworthiness of the demonstration. So I'd like to ask from James, in terms of operational terms, how does it work? We have two teams that are leading the works. The identification, evaluation, the answers, are they done in an integrated way?
Como é feito na prática?
How are they done in a practical way? Can you mention that for us?
Yes, of course I can. And thank you for the question. So the simple answer is that it's fully integrated. So for the purpose of our audit, the financial statement audit, the true and fair opinion, and the regularity opinion is performed by one team under common direction, and the work is all documented on a single file, and the output of that work is a single audit report within the annual report and accounts, which has separate opinions on the true and fair and on the regularity, but it's part of the same audit report. In practice, as part of the planning process to conduct the audit, there is lots of common understanding that's required in terms of the framework of authorities and the nature of the organisation in order to be able to do the risk assessment. But there is a parallel risk assessment, a separate risk assessment around regularity, where we have a separate form to complete, which will determine what the risks are and what testing needs to be done. And then at that point, a decision taken is as to whether work can be executed on an integrated basis, or whether there are separate regularity tests that need to be brought into the work programs to complete the overall work on the opinion.
Perfeito, James. Obrigado aí pelas suas considerações.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you for your considerations. Now, Virginia, can I ask a question for the European Code of Account? I would like to call Mr. Mariucci and Mrs. Judith to talk a little bit about the criteria. In the new account model in Brazil, in the Code of Accounts of Brazil, have some guidelines for the compliance audit, because we cannot audit everything. In your presentation, you passed to us some statistical model, the materiality, some guidelines, go where the money goes. But would like to ask how to select the best criteria in terms of legislation, regulation, so we can make a compliance audit in these subjacent institutions in a financial way. So, and there is also in the European Court, are there some criteria to establish in an objective way some relevance of the compliance of these transactions, and to have some integration of this? If there are, can you mention to us?
Thank you very much for the question. Maybe I start and then Judith will continue. I mean, starting maybe from, in Egypt, as you mentioned, we have a statistical model to select transactions in the first place, and the model is probably much more complicated than what we saw in a very simplified form in the presentation. So it's a multi-stage selection, actually, in which we start with selecting from the European budget, then we go down to the states that operate the particular transactions, and then even within one payment we can still select a subsample of items to test. Obviously, as it's a compliance audit, legality, regularity, here the criteria come straight from the legislation, and in our context, a complicating factor is that we have a multiple layers of legislation, because we have a primary law on the EU level, secondary law on the European level, but then there is a national law, regional law, and so on and so forth. So the overarching principle is that we are supposed to encompass it all. Now, in practical terms, it's much more complicated than in the idealistic world in which we are supposed to do it all. And maybe I'll ask you to give a bit more insight into how we frame it down, how we narrow it down into something that is workable. Judith, please.
Yes, so as Mariusz mentioned, for us the criteria come from the applicable laws and regulations, and this is very specific to the type of policy area. For example, in the area of cohesion spending, which is spending where the management is shared between the European Commission and the member state. So there, each year we develop, we have an audit program which we update every year, and we check whether there are any changes in the legislation at EU level or national level. So we go through EU level legislation and take those criteria which we consider would have an impact on or a risk for the regularity of the payment. These are mainly rules to ensure public procurement and that state aid requirements are complied with. And then we also look at the different national legislation, because for each member state, some rules on the eligibility of the cost are defined at national level. So there as well, we on a regular basis update our audit programs and try to be sure that we have the most important criteria which are linked to eligibility of the costs and the projects. So this we do for all different spending areas on a regular basis.
Maybe one extra comment is that obviously it's the multitude of rules, multitude of criteria that are possibly applicable in checking the compliance of a particular payment vis-a-vis the rules is such that we have to be selective at times and distinguish between those whose breach may lead to a financial impact, and these are mostly interesting for us. There will be sometimes tens and tens of lesser rules whose breach will not ultimately lead to any financial impact. And obviously we have to consider also efficiency of our audit procedures. We cannot afford spending endless time in making sure that we have checked each and every comma if the breach potentially doesn't lead to financial impact. So this is our guiding principle in selecting the criteria which are most relevant for our compliance audit and the financial the statement of assurance will be: is this criterion potentially leading to a financial impact which will also affect the level of error and possibly the opinion. Thank you.
Obrigado, senhor Mariusz, senhora Judith, muito esclarecedor. Eu queria aproveitar a oportunidade.
I'd like to still have the opportunity to ask a question to Mrs. Maria De Luz from Portugal. Mrs. Maria De Luz, the result of the successive fiscalization, which is the continuous audit called here in Brazil, in the governmental acquisitions, are they developed to form opinions in the process of certification? How are they integrated? If they are integrated, how these procedures are previously combined to be useful for these purposes, and how the auditioners can incorporate them in the work. We should have the same concept of the, I don't know if we should have the same concept of the financial audit or the simultaneous one, because in Portugal have this distinction. When we verify, could you reformulate a little bit more, because I couldn't understand better? No, Mrs. Maria, it's not regarding the continuous or the simultaneous one. I'm more asking regarding the integration of this fiscalization and the integration with the certification process. So, if this result of this fiscalization how are they used in the opinion creation? How do they convert to the formation of opinion? How these procedures are combined? Because if they are thought previously to get there, so how these evaluation from the auditioners are incorporated in the work so they can get to the certification? So this work is done in individual accounts, because they have a basis of entities, a management of entities in which all the auditioners have access to these maps, guidelines, and the ones that will certificate the account, they have a historic that's permanent and that can bring out the risks, so they can see which are the risks. So there is a checking of the accounts to see who is doing it. So I was audited by my colleagues and was I obliged to number these factors that would be indicated some faults or not, that would be discovered in some of the algorithms, because we could have the disconfiation of the process that were done before to form this opinion in a conjunct of the accounts. So these accounts make part of the general accounts of the state. So it's a work that it's in a systematic way done by two departments. The advantage now is that the information is online, everyone has access, we can vinculate in the platform, so it's easy for our colleagues to have all these verifications that are being done. More than that, the fact that the Ministry of Finances, along with the integration with the other ministries, they allow that we can see these operations month to month. And then we can see this monthly evaluation, and the verification system are a great help in the two departments, in the checking accounts department and the verification accounts department. Dr. Maria De Luz, I would like to make some comments and ask some questions, because at each answer we have the eagerness to ask more, but we don't have time for that. I will send you some emails afterwards. So just last question for Jean-Michel. As we have already mentioned, Brazil is the candidate for the board of auditioners of UN, and your experience show us a great challenge, and we would like to receive and to get from you some recommendations of some specific points that you could provide us. We saw that the Conrad in France has a specific department to conduct the international audits. So in terms of dimension, how many auditioners would be? We see that you also do the audit in more than one organism. So I believe that is a great big team. So considering one organism, one entity, what is the dimension of the team, and what is the composition of this team? Because I saw that the audit types that we imagined that they would be more financial audit, but they in the same audit is done the compliance audit and the performance one. So, what is the proportion of the composition in the team? What skills, techniques the team should have regarding the proportion of the works that should be done?
Oh, Virginia, eu vou responder.
Answer some questions, but I will do that very carefully. And this answer depends on the experience that was acquired, for instance, for example, Chile is a organization that's specific, and when the auditor from China that has another organization, so our organization is based on our experience. So what I can say is, as it was already mentioned in the first framework, the experience of 30 years and the density of the workload varies a lot. So we are now in a stage from the beginning of the year 2000 with the audit from the UN audit that was shared with the Chinese. So what I could say to provide some concrete elements, remembering that probably we will have many other meetings, more specific ones, but we are very satisfied to have a budget from behalf of the French Parliament in terms of recruiting 25 auditioners that will work in a permanent way. Part of them, which are a financial audit specialist, and others that have a management experience or diplomacy, or at least the UN knowledge of UN, because the institutional knowledge and even in a political level is important to understand what the General Assembly expects, and to widen the financial audit that the set some boundaries after that. We have a department that I would say that has maybe 6 people in a permanent way, maybe some auditioners that have been experienced, some of our newbies, have people in New York, the manager of the external audit, and 2 more other people. Anyhow, so now we have, meanwhile, resources that are limited, despite of these 20 people that are working, and that we have to integrate in the code of account, and they are part of the Department of External Audit, but the department as a whole. Despite these resources, we have to take advantage of the previous mandates. What they have learned there, it's been used now. So I have said that the audit guides should be updated. We cannot start from zero. We have this experience. So this answer for these resources depends on the previous acquired experiences, and so it's good to have and to propose a solution from one institution to the other. We know that's difficult, but it's possible. We know some of our Chinese friends, because of their size, they recruited several auditioners. and in our friends Chileans, in function of their of the side of the country, they have limited resources. So we can talk about the efficiencies too. We can do a very good job with limited resources. What I mentioned is that people work in a portion of time. Those young people or magistrates, less or more experienced ones, they are participating in external audit work for 4 weeks or 2 weeks, and we have their list because they are applying and then they are later selected. So when we have a need of widening the audit team for a determined country, we can call a colleague that has already some experience. So we have this sensitivity to extract some auditioners from the national work. So this possibility is very useful. So we can say that we can recruit 20, or now we have 30 people that are permanent, but we have to understand that the context of this accessibility, how many people can participate in the audit in a personal way. We can have thousands of people there. I have no idea how many exactly are now, but I would say that we can have at least 100 people. Some of them are just starting, are forming themselves, they are being triggered in the audit experience. Some others have more experience. So this management mode that has been established throughout the time, now in 2021, after 30 years of experience, is very satisfactory. I cannot say that it's applied to TCU. You have to take into consideration the resources reality. I believe that TCU has several personnel and resources for that. So we can, the answer is very vague, it's very general. We can share more of these experiences in a more detailed way afterwards. Thank you very much, Jean-Michel. We're very certain that we will ask you for some of your help until 2024. So we go to the end of the Q&A section. Our minister will come to give a final word here. I want just to confirm with the team if the minister is in the room. And while he enters, I would like to thank our panelists. It was a very fruitful morning from the participation of your questions. We have the desire to ask more, but now we have more insights that we can use, and we'll make some other meetings to discuss all the learning outcomes that we have taken from here to have a more enhancing process after that. Thank you very much for Marius, all of you that, and because this was a very fruitful morning. It was a great pleasure to meet you here. Thank you very much, all of you. I will pass the form to our Minister Eder so he can disclosure our seminar. He is the sub-minister of the TCU, and it's one of our biggest references of the public accounts in the country. You have the luck of having here in our frame, and he's been accompanying us in this seminar. He will make the disclosure of this seminar. Good morning, everyone. I would like to first thank, in name of the tribunal, the participation of all the specialists present here and that brought some of their contribution for the intense debate that the court has done throughout the last 15 years on the public accounts, on the certification which the European Court of Accounts is today a reference in a worldwide perspective, just as the French Court of Accounts and the experience that Portugal has in the improper payments fiscalization using the artificial intelligence. I would say that it's a great challenge for the Court of Accounts in Brazil to provide all the potential for this financial audit process, which connects to our budgetary process also, which was first discussed in the public finances too. And I believe that we are very well helped in the process of modernizing our financial audit process. And regarding the process of work, because we have a sui generis situation compared to the other courts, we see that we should have a first assessment along with the National Congress. And in this assessment, the minister is with no image, so he's going to try to share his screen. Maybe he can appear on the screen. So he will turn on the camera, so maybe he can appear with us. He will hop off and on to see if he can actually appear on the screen. Just a minute, please. I see that our minister is again on the room, but we still don't have his image.
Ministro, o senhor nos ouve? Ministro Éder? Estamos com alguns problemas. Acho que o ministro está enfrentando algum problema técnico. Vamos aguardar só mais alguns minutinhos para ver se ele volta.
Our minister is facing some technical issues. We'll just take some minutes to wait for him to join our room. Let's see if we can reestablish the connection with the minister. Today is a particularly more agitated day, so I believe that the minister is having some attributions and he's may having some problems. As the minister access, I want to ask just a question to Jean-Michel. I just apologize for the colleagues from the different Court of Accounts. If you have to leave the conference, don't worry. My question is, Jean-Michel, you have highlighted the opportunity that is to participate on the international audit for international body. So this also carries some risks. And would you highlight any risk? Maybe would you also provide us some tips to manage it and to mitigate it? So I say that there is a risk on the integration on the historic context of the National Code of Accounts. It's a new competence. I remember that there was some comments that some presidents said that our work should be, and if we didn't have the support from our president, actually the international audit, the two coins of the two sides of the coins, and it was not a question of the country. It would be a different thing. It was not the additional activity to be integrated, and it was necessary. It was more of an internal risk on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, the related activity would be more considered or on a more separated way. that would not carry some benefits to the tribunal, to the court. If the idea is divulgated is that the international audit is to take internal resources and project to the abroad, these without any return of an investment, this is a risk. In the beginning, the risk existed. Now, when I see the candidates that want to participate in the international mission, I understand that this risk is already overcome. It's a internal technical risk, and it doesn't make sense to talk about this when we talk about our institution. But when we have many people that are a magistrate statute that is not included in the department, so this idea that we should convince to be a opportunity, not a loss of resources, it's important. Another risk is the ability that many people just thought that it was necessary to only speak some English, but it wasn't, and they thought they could do some audit in the French-speaking country. But when you go to a meeting, the chief of the local session is not a French speaker, so the language ability is very important to be prepared in a carefully way. We have training some months before. The RP department from France has a training, linguistic training to show that we have the ability. So it's another risk to subestimate the English level because the demand is very elevated. So I had not thought on this, but so these are unfortunately speaking, these are the risks we see. So I think they converge with some of the data that were brought up and in an eternal way that we're trying to deal with. Thank you. Eduardo, is there any other question you would like to address? Because the minister is still trying to join the room. So, Virginia, I would like to put that general question that permeated the presentations in this morning. And so, Jean-Michel, Dr. Maria De Luz could address. So the question is regarding the compliance audit or the regarding the financial process, because the TCU has started this integration now, and it brings a lot of challenges. So I would like to know from you how the challenges were overcome. If you had some challenges and how they were overcome in each one of the institutions of the control. So I could start from the European Tribunal Court. Dr. Marius, can you start answering, please?
To leave here for another meeting. In terms of the, let's say, the challenges, as I understand, you are referring to, in our point of view, the main challenge for our compliance audit is to change, let's say, how the EU budget is spent. There is a change in spending EU budget based on how we call it cost reimbursement, so that investment projects are implemented and then the costs are reimbursed from the EU budget. And we see nowadays a change that instead of this type of spending, we will have spending based on performance indicators. So then for us, the main challenge is how to assess regularity of spending, which is based on meeting performance indicators, and these might be even implementation of reforms or some implementation of of indicators, output indicators for projects. So we are currently in this challenge. As some part of the EU budget, a big amount of money has been decided to be spent this way, and we are thinking currently how to adjust our regularity audit to this type of spending.
Muito obrigado, senhora Judith. Gostaria de
Thank you
abrir
very much, Mrs. Judith. I would like also to ask Mrs. Maria De Luz if you would like to comment something regarding to that. So this anxiety, we are trying to still make it. In a first moment, we discussed and we adapted the roadmaps. We have to review the manuals. It's a process that effectively has been a great challenge to start it, to make the integration of these methodologies. I think our minister is already here. Minister Weber de Oliveira, could you make the final consideration, please? So, well, I would first like to apologize for this unforeseen event, but fortunately, with Giovanna's help, it was solved. As it was previously mentioned, I think the important part is to thank all the Brazilian participants, all those who have participated here, and to thank all the Court of Accounts, Mrs. Luz, those from the court, French court, Dr. Mariusz Pomiński, and all those foreign specialists that contributed a lot for this seminar. It was very important the work in the superior fiscalizing entities that have recovered some of the credibility worldwide, and we can talk about that, especially for Brazil, because the TCU has had much credibility regarding the Brazilian government, and also the county courts, because we are 33 courts in Brazil, and the TCU has this responsibility of also performing a role of making the system more dynamic. And for more than a century, our institution was created in the 19th century. And this work of checking accounts, of the public financing analysis, the budgetary system, and the undue payments process. So all these processes, in our case, they interact with the process of the previous assessment that is provided to the accounts done by the President of Brazil. It's a process being done in Brazil for more than 20 years, and we have mirrored on the international experience in the French court and the GEO, on the EFS from the United Kingdom, so that we are very thankful for the results in the seminar, in which we had many people assisting to that, and the people like that inspired us to, so that many people that are watching it, they could go deeper in these topics, especially in our Code of Accounts. So we have this seminar as a mark for the next steps. To develop a financial audit culture is not a process that is so simple. It's not as simple as providing a culture for the operational audit, so it's much more specialized. But our court has reached over the 10 years to dynamize this process and to obtain outcomes from these checking accounts, and to be able to make the audit, financial audit, in a more technical way, in a more credible way. So this is the message I would like to leave to all of you. Thank you very much for all that have watched this session. We finish here our seminar. Thank you very much, our minister.